My fellow Americans, we must never, ever believe that our diversity is a weakness. It is our greatest strength.
Well, that, of course, was President Clinton giving his State of the Union address last January, and what a difference a year makes. Mr. Clinton is due to give this year's address, of course, tomorrow night, but it will be under the shadow of allegations he had a sexual relationship with a young intern. Our next guest crafted a string of memorable speeches for Presidents Reagan and Bush and wrote this best-selling book. And she has also written a new book on speechwriting called Simply Speaking. Peggy Noonan joins us this morning from New York. Peggy, thank you very much for being with us.
You bet. Hello, Bridget. Good morning.
Good morning. Let's say you are writing the President's State of the Union speech tomorrow. Do you mention the scandal, or do you try to conduct business as usual?
I think that you try to find a third choice. I think maybe the third choice is this. The President knows that everybody, from the minute he walks into that hall, is thinking about the charges that have been leveled against him. It would be utterly inappropriate for him to go into those charges in his State of the Union address. It is, after all, the State of the Union address, the prime governmental address of the year. However, I think it would probably be right for him to acknowledge the fact that the speech is taking place amid charges and counter-charges, and that he will answer all questions about it at the appropriate time, as he might put it, and in another venue. But until that point, he means to go on and build that bridge to the 21st century, you know, and do the sort of stuff he does. I think it'll be awkward, to say the least, if he says nothing, and I think it'll be awkward if he says too much.
Now, what about a speech in and of itself, not the State of the Union, an address to the nation, talking specifically about the scandal? This morning, the New York Times' William Safire suggesting a buddy speech, as he called it. How do you write that? Do you write a complete mea culpa, or what?
Oh, Bridget, you know, I think because of the nature of the charges leveled against the President, the profound personal nature of those charges, the intimacy of what is being discussed, that just doesn't lend itself to a formal address by a President of the United States on a full network speech at 8 p.m. on some busy evening. I think if he's going to talk about it, and he should, he ought to do it in interviews with reporters. I think he ought to. I think what he owes the American people right now is exposing himself to journalists for an unlimited amount of time, really, and telling the truth, which would be nice and refreshing.
Of course, you've written speeches for perhaps the greatest communicator, as he's been often called, of them all, Ronald Reagan, also for George Bush. We're going to actually show parts of those speeches in a moment. How does Mr. Clinton rank as a speaker?
He's kind of interesting, I think. When he is ad-libbing on the stump, as he was in the past year in the political season, he's kind of interesting to watch. You know, he has a kind of a slightly dangerous looseness. He's not going from a text. You don't know what he's going to say. In a more formal setting, he loses his gifts. He goes on, he tends to go on at a sort of Fidel Castro length at things like the State of the Union and other major addresses. He cannot stop talking. It seems almost compulsive. He's better on the stump ad-libbing than he is in a formal setting, but in general, you know, there's something interesting about Clinton. He is so interesting to watch, but he rarely says anything that is actually genuinely interesting and genuinely memorable. So you get a very funny sort of picture. You want to watch, you want to listen, and yet nothing substantive happens. He has a kind of intensity that is interesting. He has sort of the intensity of a very thoughtful person without giving us the thoughts of a very thoughtful person, I think, in general.
All right, Peggy Noonan, one last question. Your book, Simply Speaking, of course, we've been talking about the President. It's irresistible. But what advice do you offer for the average person in speech writing or speech making?
Well, my book was written essentially for people like me who were phobic about public speaking and eventually had to do it. I avoided public speaking from the age of 16 to the age of 40, and then at the age of 40 I was contractually obliged to talk about my first book. And so I know what I went through in order to be able to do that, and the book is written for people who have the same struggles I did. So half of the book is how to do it. The other half, it talks a little bit philosophically about the text of a speech and what you ought to be trying to do in it.
All right. Well, Peggy, thank you very much for being with us and sharing your insights this morning. Do appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Bridget.
All right, once again, Peggy Noonan there, and her brand new book called Simply Speaking. We have this reminder for you for the latest